Welcome everyone to another episode of Pure Performance. Actually, not Pure Performance; it's a performance clinic. I'm mixing up my own channels. Today, it's mastering session replay, a technology that is very hot these days when we talk with the industry, when we talk with our customers, prospects, and partners. And I'm very happy that I found two experts in that field, and I would like to give them the chance to introduce themselves. Maybe let's start with Dania. Can you introduce yourself, who you are, what you do at Dynatrace?
So hello, I'm Dania Grave. I'm the technical product manager in charge of session replay feature here in Dynatrace. And I just want to start this presentation to show you our feature.
It's perfect.
And I'm Rick St. John. I'm Rick St. John. I am a pre-sales engineer out of the Detroit office and been with Dynatrace in this role for I think about 15 years, and focused in DEM quite a bit, and digital experience monitoring and session replay over the last couple of years.
Perfect. So again, thanks for taking the time. I know you have a packed session of a lot of content, both a little bit of slides, but a lot of live demo, troubleshooting tips, and all that stuff. And folks that have just joined, if you have any questions, use the Q&A feature. If you're watching this offline later on, you can reach out to us either through answers.dynatrace.com, or now you have the names of Rick and Dania, so I'm pretty sure you figure out how to get in contact with us. And the questions that are coming in live, I will make sure to moderate them throughout the webinar, or we'll have dedicated time at the end. But now I will close my mouth and I will hand it over to you.
Okay, so as we have announced already, we will talk today about session replay, which is a part of the digital experience monitoring offer that we have here at Dynatrace. And the main parts of this digital experience monitoring are real user monitoring, synthetics, and session replay. What's session replay? Well, basically, it reproduces the interaction of the real users with your web application. It's like you can think of it as a web, a cam sit behind your user's shoulders, and then you can record as a video all what the user is doing. But here we have also the possibility to hide all the sensitive information that the user is seeing in the screen. So again, it's kind of an extension of the RAM offering that provides a visually accurate reproduction of the user interaction. Today, it's available for web applications, but will be extended to iOS and Android native applications. The main use case for session replay today is troubleshooting, but you can also use it for compliant resolution or to usability, to understand the usability problems that your application has. This is also a useful tool to measure the impact of the errors in the end users, and that will help in the prioritization of the tasks. So imagine that you are not a technical guy and you can exactly evaluate the impact of an error in your users, then you will have more information to properly prioritize all these issues. So as the session replay is an optional module in RAM, the deployment mode is exactly the same that we have today for RAM. So let's continue and let's talk a little bit about the architecture. How does it work? So session replay is a module. It's a feature composed for two different modules. The first one is called Recorder, and it's the JavaScript that is injected also in the browser. This JavaScript will send the information through the web server agent or the active gate to our Dynatrace cluster, and then this information will be stored in a different storage, which is called session replay storage. The information that this JavaScript agent sends could be as binary information or text information. In the text information, we are sending all the events that the user does, and as binary, we are sending all the DOM changes. Then when we are trying to play back the session, what happens is basically that we have this player that is also in the replay browser. It will access the replay storage through our cluster, but then it will also access the original website to retrieve resources. That's how we can play back the sessions. how can you enable session replay if you are already a Dynatrace client and you have RAM? So basically, the first thing that you need is to have an active TEM license. If you are a new client, that's okay. Probably you already have it. If you are a client that is migrating from AppMon application, then you will need to update your contract. So for sure, you need to have real user monitoring enabled in your application because session replay is an extra module there. The min agent versions that you need is 167, and also the cluster needs to be 164 or other versions. As I already explained, we are sending binary information, so you will need to configure your firewall to allow application object string content coming from your own application. And then if you are in a managed environment, you will need a secondary disk configured to store the replay information. And here, by following this formula, you will be able to calculate how much space you need per set.
Hey, Dania, can I quickly interrupt?
Yes.
Can I just quickly interrupt? Because I just got a couple of people saying they hear some background noises. So we had this issue in the past last week. There should be no background noises, meaning no background music. In case you still hear some background music, do me a favor, just log out and log in again. It should have gone away once we started the meeting. That's one thing. Second thing, it is a reminder, please use the Q&A feature for questions. And third thing, Dania, when you advance the slides, I have started advancing the slides for you because I think when you do it, you have to either say push to audience or click on the arrows forward and backward. I think when you advanced, it didn't show up in the live view, so I advanced for you just to make sure when you advance to the next slide, click on push to audience, just to make sure.
Okay.
All right. Now I'll give it back to you.
Perfect. So once all these prerequisites are met, then you can basically go to the application and enable session replay. But I think that the best way to see it is basically by doing a demo. And let's check exactly how the feature can be enabled and how you can use it. So Rick, could you please show us?
Sure thing. Yeah, let me go ahead and share out my screen here. And let me know if you are not seeing my screen. Should be sharing that
so
out
for
now.
for every attendee, because we have multiple view options here in On24, if you want to see the screen that Rick is sharing, please click on the audience view. So there's different views you can switch between the slides and the live view. What you should be seeing is Rick's browser showing a lot of applications in an application screen. Yeah,
exactly. That's right. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off by just showing some of the configuration options for session replay, how to enable that, how to configure some of the things within here. Then I'm going to go through just sort of a basic record and playback of that, and then get into more of the troubleshooting use cases that Dania referred to, and how session replay can really complement and enhance what you may already be doing with the backend monitoring and with real user monitoring. So, as Dania had mentioned, session replay is really just an extension of real user monitoring. What we mean by that is that it's the same JavaScript tag that you're already using. So if you have RUM enabled currently for any of your applications, it's really straightforward to be able to set up session replay for that. So just taking any one of these applications, basically you go into an application, you're going to edit that application. And by the way, if you don't have RUM enabled, obviously you can turn that on and off just with a switch right within here. For session replay, it's really the same thing. Within the properties of that application, you go to session replay, and you'll see that there's an option to turn that on and off. That there's no new tag or anything else that needs to be installed or inserted into the page. It's the same JavaScript tag that you're using. It just has the flag that indicates that yes, we want to record that. In terms of some of the configuration options that you have, similar to real user monitoring, you have the ability to be able to record a certain percentage of the sessions that you want to record. The default is 100%, which means 100% of the sessions that you are recording with real user monitoring are also going to have session replay enabled. Now, keep in mind, one consideration for that is that when you enable real user monitoring, you can define also a certain percentage. So if I only define 50% of my sessions we're going to capture those sessions for real user monitoring, that means if this is set to 100%, that means that those 50% will also have session replay. You're not going to get session replay for something that you are not getting a real user monitoring session for. So if I set this one to 50%, for example, that means that of the 50% of sessions that we're recording for real user monitoring, that only 50% of those will get sessions actually recorded as well. So in effect, 25% of your applications would end up getting recorded. So these are cumulative and work together. Some of the other configuration options that you have within here are defining privacy settings. First of all, you have an opt-in mode. This is primarily for GDPR compliance and data privacy standards in different regions. Basically, what this means is in certain regions, users have to proactively allow for those sessions to actually be recorded, meaning that you have to present something that says, we want to, in order to improve performance or your user experience, do you allow us to be able to record the session? The user clicks on OK, and that would enable session replay. Then it won't record that particular session. What that also means is that the developers have to present that opt-in mode to the users. And when they click on OK, all that's really doing is enabling our API to be able to, or leveraging our API to be able to enable session replay for that particular session. Some of the other considerations that you have for privacy concerns is obviously when I go to a website and put in my credit card information, or I am ordering medicine or something along those lines. Where you have PII, you have PHI considerations that are involved. So you want to be able to exclude certain things. You can do that with session replay as well. You can exclude, for example, entire URLs that you want to be able to not record. So maybe something like a login page. I don't want to record that at all. So I can put in that particular URL, or I can use I can define a regular expression for different URLs that I want to be able to exclude out of there, and those entire pages will not be recorded. The sessions themselves will still be recorded, but those pages will be excluded from that. There may be cases where you want to record the page, but there's certain content within the page that you want to be able to exclude as well. If you've looked at session replay, one thing I'm going to note about this is that this screen may look a little bit different because this is actually this is a new configuration screen that's going to be available in less than a month. It's going to be out there. So yours may look a little bit different right now. Right now, basically, you've got the options to whitelist and blacklist. The default option with the new configuration is going to be the super safe mode, which essentially is going to mask everything, essentially except for the style sheets in there, so that everything, and Dania will show an example of that, what that looks like. But basically, that is just ensures that you know where all of the objects on the page, all the text, the images, and so forth are supposed to be. You can see where the images are supposed to be and so forth, but everything is masked by default. So you don't see anything that the users are entering. You don't see any of the text or anything that's delivered to the end user, none of the images, anything like that. Safe is just a one step down. The only thing that's different in there is that you can, with the safe mode, you can see the text that's on the screen. So all the text on the screen, in the hyperlinks, you still don't see the images and your drop-down boxes and things like that. Or you have the ability with Session Replay to get very explicit about what you want to include or exclude. You have whitelists, meaning that I want to exclude everything except for the locator objects I identify within here. So there may be a particular element on the page that maybe there's something like a login that I want to be able to see or something like that. I can, if it has an ID of login, I could just put that in there. And with Session Replay, if you're not familiar with using that, you can very easily go into the dev tools and inspect the elements and then just copy that locator object and paste it within here. and that will whitelist or blacklist, depending on what option that you're actually using. One thing I want to note about this is hiding the user interaction with that element. Let me give you an example of where that would be useful. Let's say that the element that I want to hide is something that is asking for my sex, am I male, am I female, or it's asking for my religion or something like that, and it's radio buttons. So I can say I don't want to show which radio button is actually selected, but it's obvious on a replay of which of those radio buttons they're actually clicking on, because you can see the mouse movements in there. If you choose to hide the interaction with that, that would prevent them from seeing the actual interaction with those elements themselves. So it just adds an extra layer of security within there. The other thing I'll mention about the whitelist and the blacklist is that you have these attribute definitions within here. So 99% of the time, what our customers are working with to whitelist or blacklist elements is going to be certain locators on the page that they're working with. There is what are called data attributes of HTML5, particularly the data name, as you can see within there, that allows you to be able to carry over data from page to page. This just allows you to also mask that information if you happen to be using those data elements within HTML5. So you have effectively the ability to be able to mask anything that the users are entering, anything that is server delivered within there, to be able to comply with any privacy requirements that you actually have within your organization. So basically what I'm going to do at this point, like I said, is I'm actually not going to save any of the changes that I have in here. I don't want to make any changes to that. As a matter of fact, I don't even have the permissions to make those changes to that application. But just wanted to show, what the options that you had are for setting session replay configuration options. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through just a basic record and playback of session replay and show you what that actually looks like. So let me actually open up a new tab within here. And as I start working through it, we have an application that I can show what that actually looks like. So within this application, basically this is it's a typical retail sort of application. So as I kind of drive through that transaction the way that an end user would, maybe select an item in here. If I choose to add that to the cart, I can see that I'm getting a message in here saying that it's a required field. What is it actually referring to? I don't really know. It just says that we have some required fields. I actually do know. I have to choose the color and size, but it's not very explicit what that's asking for right there. So if I add those into the cart and give it a moment to actually process that. This application, I checked it a little bit earlier. It was running a little bit slow, so if not, I've got a session that I can actually replay for that, but we'll give that a moment to see if that actually puts that in there. But basically, as the user drives through the transaction, as Dania mentioned, what we're doing is we are recording all of the DOM interactions, so all of the mouse movements, all of the click actions, and so forth within the application. So I selected the orange. Finally, that switched over to orange there. But we're also recording, what all of the objects that we're actually requesting in there. And this may be moving a little bit slow for me. Okay, there we go. So it's added that to the cart finally. Let's see if we get that going into the cart. I should see that actually entered in there. Let me actually, it tells me right now I don't have anything. There we go. Finally added that into the cart. So we can go through a checkout. And the nice thing that you'll see on the replay is that in those sorts of cases where maybe there's a lot of time that you're waiting for something, that Dynatrace gives you the ability to be able to fast forward through that. So you're not just sitting there watching, for 5 minutes while somebody went to get coffee or something along those lines. So we'll show you an example of that as well. I think this may be enough to actually show that. I wanted to get to a point where it's showing maybe the text fields that we have in here. But maybe I'll just close that out and go into showing a replay if that doesn't come up within here very quickly.
It seems whoever built this sample app and is hosting it definitely needs Dynatrace to make it faster. Right.
Right. So, yeah, just filling out some information. The reason why I'm doing this is just to show you, the ability to be able to mask some of that information. So if I just put in some of the information here, and so forth. And I'm obviously not going to fill out the rest of the information. I'll just close it out at this point. So with Dynatrace, and this is more of a factor of real user and monitoring in general, the concept of a session is really, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but basically up until the point that the user actually closes the tab, leaves that application, shuts down the browser, so forth. That's the session itself. And Dynatrace is recording that entire session. Now, because of the way that I actually close that, it's still going to show as a live session within there. What I'm actually going to do is, let me actually, now that I've recorded that, I want to focus on, I'm going to go back to the slides for just a moment and talk about some of the considerations for some of the technologies that you may need to be aware of what does work and what won't work with session replay. So a couple of considerations about this. So first of all, some of these technologies are not supported, like frames. We're not talking iframes. Iframes are supported, but we're talking about the traditional frames. If you're still working with those, then session replay isn't going to support those different frames that you have there. If you work with a shadow DOM, which is really a DOM within a specific element, so the individual element has its own DOM, then because we're only working with the primary DOM itself, we don't see that shadow DOM. It's not going to work with it. If you work with solutions like Canvas or WebGL, which are basically used for 2D and 3D modeling, we're not going to work with that as well. Or web components, which is used to be able to develop custom elements, that's not going to be supported as well. Something like pseudo CSS. Pseudo CSS is more of an interactive, dynamic CSS. So like when you hover over an element, or you hover over a link and that changes the color, that won't be supported if it relates to the current state. What I mean by that is that if it is something that is different from when the user recorded it, say for example when they were in the session, and the link that is in there had already been visited, so maybe that link is purple. When we replay that, for the user that's replaying it, they hadn't visited that, so to them it's going to look like it's been unvisited. So it would appear blue, for example, for that user. That's all pseudo CSS that does that, but it's going to be dependent upon the state of the user that is actually doing the replay. So a lot of the pseudo CSS elements will work, but anything that relates to the state that the user was in at the time that they were doing the actual recording would have difficulties. And then some of the older technologies like Flash and Java applets and so forth, if you're working with those, that's not going to be supported. If you're talking about downloading a Word document or something like that, we're not going to show you those actual documents. You'll see everything up to the point where the user actually downloads that, or the point where the user does a movie replay, but that's also not going to be supported as well. So some other considerations about the resources as well. The resources are retrieved when you do the playback. So all of your static resources, your style sheets, your images, those are going to be retrieved when the user does the playback. So that does lead to some potential issues that you need to be aware of. And that's also going to be addressed. Dania will be talking a little bit about that as well. But currently, as things stand right now, we are replaying the DOM elements, and then when it goes to replay that, any style sheets, images, and so forth, any of those static objects are going to be requested during the replay as if the user was replaying that. So what that basically means is that those resources need to be available from where the user is doing the replay. So for example, if it's an internal application that isn't accessible from the outside, and I'm doing the replay from the outside, when I go to request those objects, just like I would if I try to get that application, go to that application directly, I'm going to get 400 level errors saying that it's not available or something along those lines. So if the objects require authentication on the replay, we haven't authenticated to get those objects, it'll be as if those objects are not there. That doesn't mean just because a user logs into the application that it requires authentication to get those objects. Those individual objects may not require authentication. So that anytime that there's a login doesn't mean replay is not going to work. It just means If I get an authentication error by trying to download that image, then it's going to fail for me right now during the replay. Dania will talk about the roadmap and how that's going to be impacted by that. Another consideration is that for fonts specifically, and anything that is not using HTTPS, any static objects not using HTTPS, if it's fonts or HTTP, there is a browser plugin that actually retrieves that information. So what will happen is that the first time that you go to replay anything that requires fonts or HTTP resources, you'll get a little message that says, you need a browser plugin, click OK to install that plugin. That will allow those objects to be replayed. Resources are cached locally, just like when you go to play those. So when I replay those objects will get cached on the machine that I'm actually doing the replay. And kind of summarizing this, if the objects are not available from the origin site, when you do the replay, then it's not going to, it'll be as if you were working with that application and they weren't available. The image won't display properly, the style sheet doesn't get applied, the font doesn't get applied if those individual objects are not available. And Dania's going to talk a little bit more about this, where resource capturing and persistence will be added in there, so that those objects are available without requiring access to those objects. The last thing, it has to deal with the browser support for the actual replay. Currently, only Chrome is supported, but other browsers are on the roadmap as well. So one consideration is that when you do the replay, it needs to be done in Chrome. For recording, any browser is going to be supported that supports the JavaScript. But for actually doing the replay, it needs to be done in Chrome currently. So let me actually go back into my screen here.
And Rick, just as you're switching over, just a couple of people are still having challenges switching between the views. So in the Media Control Center, I think that's how it's called, you can switch between the slides and also the live audience view, where you see Rick sharing his screen. That's one thing. Also, please use the question feature. So Rick, there's a couple of questions that came in around access control, like who has access to the data? Is it possible to only allow certain users to have access to the data? Is there any auditing? So in case an employee got rogue, is there some auditing in there that tell you who has viewed which type of data? So there's a lot of questions around access control. Who has access to that data?
Sure. As it stands currently, anybody that has the ability to be able to view a user session, a real user monitoring session, has the ability to do a replay on there. Dania, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. I know that there's some roadmap security considerations that are coming up. I'm not sure if that's on the near-term roadmap for Dania to discuss, but that is certainly something that is on the roadmap to be able to have more control over that. Okay.
We will add the ability to have more control and more granular control about who can see the session and which data inside the session can be seen for which user. That's something we are working on. Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
All right. So let me actually go back into any other questions up to this point, Andy?
There's a lot of questions, but I think we'll cover the rest later on in the Q&A session.
Okay. All right. So let me go back into here and see if I can pull up that session. And I know that this was with the Performance-Aware Shop. And let me actually go back to just the last 30 minutes or so within here. And this would be me. I'm actually coming out of Birmingham, Michigan here. So we'll pull up that session right here. So when you're talking about real user monitoring, if you're familiar with it up to this point, you have the same capabilities of going in there, being able to see, demographic information about the users. If I had logged in, I could have pulled in my username. It shows me my location, my IP address, ISP, all that sort of fun information that you guys are currently getting with real user monitoring. Have the ability to be able to see what the user was actually doing, get into waterfall charts, and so forth within here. With Dynatrace, with session replay enabled, while you're looking at that session, maybe what I want to be able to see is what that actually looked like for the user. So I can come into the session replay tab and I can play that session back. I'm just going to play that full session back within here. So as you go through there, you're going to see the user working with the application just like they did. You see the mouse movements. You're going to see scroll actions within there and so forth. So as I selected that option in there, notice I added that cart. I didn't see, I see the error message in there. So one thing about this is that there are some aspects of user experience and UI issues that we're kind of exposing here as well. For example, I can see on the playback that message isn't very clear. What I'll also see in here, I'm actually going to skip forward through that time where it was still processing, is that when I changed the color of that, I changed it to orange, if you remember, but when I went in here, it went back to its original, I guess, teal color, whatever that is. So that's sort of another UI issue that something like Session Replay would expose that regular user monitoring would not expose. That's not an actual issue that's going to show up as an error or a performance issue with Dynatrace, but it's a UI issue that we can catch with something like Session Replay. So that's one of the real nice value propositions for Session Replay is sort of capturing those sorts of UI issues. Notice that some of the components within here of what I'm typing in are actually being obfuscated. So what I'm entering in there is out of the box. Session Replay doesn't include that information. So it's just going to show up as obfuscated information. Anything that's server delivered currently out of the box is you'll have to manually choose what you do and don't want to obfuscate. That could be entire classes or div tags or something along those lines. I don't have to do it for every single element. Matter of fact, one of the things I often recommend to customers is that any elements that are server delivered that you want to make sure get obfuscated, add it as as a class. So your developers are adding sensitive information as a class, so that on the Session Replay side, all I have to do is say anything that includes the obfuscate class is going to automatically be obfuscated by Dynatrace. So you don't have to do that on the Session Replay side. That becomes sort of put the onus sort of on the dev team and builds the privacy best practices into that dev team. But I just wanted to show what a basic record and playback looks like within here, that we're going to show scroll actions. We're going to show how the user is actually interacting with the page and so forth. Let me actually show something a little bit more relevant from the troubleshooting use case that Dania was referring to. So here we have a problem ticket that is showing that we have some issues with this application. We can see that we have synthetic transactions that are failing. We have some real user application issues that are happening within here. From a Session Replay perspective, what's important about this is the impacted users. So which users actually were impacted by this problem? With Session Replay, even without Session Replay, you have the ability to be able to dive in there and see a list of those users that are having those problems. So I can go into those, look at those individual sessions. The nice thing about this is that if I go into one of these users and looking at these sessions within here, maybe I want to actually focus on just sessions where the user had rage clicks. So rage clicks are, we've all done it, where we go to click on a link or click on something, we expect it to do something, and it actually doesn't. Let me actually do it this way. So yeah, we expect it to do something and it's not actually doing it. So what do? We click on it 10 times and we expect that one of those are going to work. So we recognize that as a potential user experience issue. So looking at one of this guy's sessions here, basically what we're going to see, again, same real user information. Here's that rage click that he had. Here is a frustrated view. The reason why this one's actually frustrated is because of some errors and annoyances. Specifically, it's JavaScript errors that this guy was getting. What I'm looking at right now is all real user monitoring stuff. It's all, we're not talking specifically about Session Replay, but when we're evaluating these type of issues, I can come in here and I can evaluate the JavaScript error itself, and I can see what the message was. So the error message that we see in here, I can see where the stack trace of where this issue actually occurred and so forth, and may need to upload the minified file or the source map to be able to to see explicitly where that's in there, but that's all real user monitoring stuff that you have access to currently if you have RUM enabled for that application. So this gives the front-end developers, the JavaScript developers, the ability to be able to see where those errors actually lie. Now, one of the challenges that you really get with something like a JavaScript error is a lot of times those JavaScript errors are innocuous, meaning that, yeah, it's technically triggering an error, but it may be because something as simple as they're using an older browser that's not compatible with the JavaScript framework that we have. And yeah, it's triggering an error, but it's not really impacting the user. I don't want my developers going around and trying to track down every single JavaScript error. It's not going to be effective to do that. So one of the things you want to know is whether that JavaScript error is actually impacting the user. That's where session replay becomes useful, where I can come in here and I can see what actually happened with that user. So if I replay this particular session, and again, what we're going to see, the scroll actions, the mouse movement as it goes through here, and so forth. Now, a couple of things I'll also point out with here, rather than just showing out that, yeah, we can record and playback, is just some of the controls that you have within here. So you have the ability to pause replays. You have the ability to skip inactivity. So, for example, again, if a user is going, went to the screen and then they went off and got coffee for 5 minutes and then they come back, you don't want to sit here and stare at a replay for 5 minutes. So you can just tell it to automatically skip anything where there's any inactivity. Or I can navigate to actions, or where those errors actually occurred, I could just navigate to where the error is itself. So rather than having to watch a 20-minute replay to get to the actual error, here's the error and this is the rage clip. So if you watch, what happens here is when the user actually goes to purchase this, notice also this information is all obfuscated. When they purchase this, we want to know, did that JavaScript error actually impact the user? Now, what they should have seen here, and I'm going to pause it again, is they should have seen some sort of summary that says, congratulations on your purchase. Click on Open Summary to view summary of your tickets. Well, instead, what we got was this E1234 obscure message that a developer knows what it is, but the end user doesn't. So again, there's sort of a usability thing that we can work on to give some sort of a meaningful error. The user doesn't know if they just spent $700 on this trip or not. They're clicking on Open Summary, nothing's happening, and that's where that rage click comes in. So if you watch here, they're going to click on it a bunch of times when that comes up. That's that rage click that's actually occurring. So now they're frustrated. Now they're going to a contact page to call somebody to resolve that issue. So answering a question like whether this issue actually impacts the end user itself answers a question that's really valuable, especially these front-end issues that may not necessarily manifest itself as something that the back-end monitoring by alone would actually capture. Now, in this case, to tie everything together, Dynatrace gives you the ability to be able to again, come in here, see where that issue actually lied within there, and we actually see that, yeah, this did actually cause an error. We called it a 500 error when they tried to go to the bookings. So as I sort of follow this, that session to the back end, that's where I can come in, look at that individual session. I can see where the errors actually lie. And as I look at the errors on the back end side, what I'm actually seeing within here is it's actually really just an array out of bounds. There's 6 items in here. It's looking for the 6 items, but it's 0 base, so it's actually looking for the 7th item, so it's not there. So that triggered the 500 level error on the back end, manifested itself as that JavaScript error on the front end. So Dynatrace together, when you combine session replay with the full 360-degree view of the application from the end user to the back end, allows you to be able to tie everything together and see where those issues actually lie. So one last thing to note real quick is another way to be able to view this information is if you're looking at the application view. So if I go into applications, I select my application, now I'm looking at more aggregate data. The way that we just viewed it was looking at a problem ticket, finding an individual session, and then troubleshooting that session. If we take it from more of an aggregate approach, I'm looking at the application view and I see errors that we have within here. And maybe I want to know, okay, these errors that I'm seeing, what kind of problems is that actually, how am I actually seeing that problem for the users? How did that present itself to the user? So I could see something like this 500 level error in the application view, and then come in here and see a list of the individual users, and then replay one of those sessions. So I could come in here and replay that individual session for that user. And this, I believe this actually ends up being the same message for that user, but that we just saw within there. But I just wanted to show a different approach to be able to get to that sort of information. So getting into it either from a problem ticket or the user sessions view, or also looking at from a higher view within the application view, and being able to follow that issue to the individual sessions that way. So what I want to talk about, I'm going to switch gears here for just a moment and just talk about some of the troubleshooting things that you can do with session replay. If you enable session replay and it doesn't seem like it's working, what are some of the things that we can actually do? So let me actually stop sharing my screen for a moment. And then I want to push this out here. So typically when I'm troubleshooting problems for session replay, the first thing that I do is I start from the highest level, go into the user sessions, and then filter by sessions that have user sessions that have replay enabled. So filter by session replay equals yes. If everything says session replay and the dropdown only gives you no, that means that none of the sessions within the time frame that you're looking at has replay enabled. So if we see that yes is one of the options, that means that there are some of the sessions that have replay enabled. So the next thing that you want to do is go into one of those sessions. You'll see the replay button in there, or you should. So you want to go into session replay, see that there's a replay button, or do I see the option for an individual user action to replay it from there? It's one thing I didn't show is that you have the ability to replay the entire session, or you can start that replay from an individual user action in the user action list. So if you find that there are no sessions that are replayable, we don't have any sessions to replay, the next thing that you want to do is to validate whether you're actually getting the replay tag in the browser itself. The way that you can do that, and just in the interest of time, rather than showing that live, I'm going to show just within the slide. But if you go into the dev tools, and each browser is different how you get there, but they should, at least on Windows, Control-Shift-I for any of the browsers will get you into the dev tools. If you go into the dev tools, go to the JavaScript column within there, and then specifically look for this tag. This is the same tag that you'll get whether session replay is there or just real user monitoring. The difference is if you want to validate whether session replay is actually enabled, look for this capital Q. That capital Q is a feature hash that indicates that we're capturing or that we're actually capturing the session, or that session replay is enabled for that session. All of these letters and numbers that are in there, those are all different feature hashes, which are just different features that are enabled. For session replay, you want to look for this capital Q, not the small q. There's another small q that's a different feature hash. You want to look for this capital Q that's in here. The other thing that you want to look for is this other Ruxit agent tag that has a capital D in it within there. Actually, let me go back to this one. This capital D. So the one with the capital Q indicates that session replay is enabled for the tag. That doesn't necessarily mean that this session is getting recorded. Remember, if I say 50% of my sessions, I want session replay, I'm still going to get this capital Q in there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that session's getting recorded. This other one that has a capital D, it's kind of obscured right now because of the oval that's in there, but this capital D right there indicates that this particular session is getting recorded. So that's two ways that you can validate that the tag's getting injected, session replay is enabled, and that this session's actually getting recorded. If you see that in there, the next thing that you'll want to take a look at is in the XHR tab. So you have the JavaScript tab and then the XHR tab. What you're going to be looking for are these options in here that are getting sent back. You're going to see these beacon forwarders that are getting sent back to Dynatrace. Each of these beacon forwarded, some of that contains binary data, some of it's just text data that you have in there. But that is the actual data that's getting sent back. All of the DOM manipulations and so forth that's getting sent back to Dynatrace itself. So within the dev tools, you're going to be looking for that the Ruxit agent tag is getting injected, and in the XHR tab, that the data is actually getting, these beacon forwarders are actually getting sent back to the ActiveGate or to the front end of the application itself. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show. I know that there's a couple of unanswered questions in terms of some of the configuration for masking, some of the changes that are occurring, and talking about mobile. So I'm going to pause here and then pass it back over to Dania to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so I think that now we should also talk a little bit about what's next, or which are the improvements we have done lately regarding data privacy and regarding the full troubleshooting workflow. I will share my screen with you, and I will show you. So, for example, that's something that we have introduced recently. Imagine that you have configured your application and you basically forgot to configure a field to be masked in which there is sensitive information. So right now, this information is available to the people that can have access to the replay. But now, recently, we have introduced a new feature that is basically, it's basically to introduce the safety net to say now the rules that are configured at this moment on time will be also applied during replay time. So that will mean, for example, that this session that contains sensitive information you don't want people to see it will be, I will just advance a little bit here, and I will play back, and now you will see as this information is already masked and nobody else will have time. So that means usually what we do is that the masking rules that are configured in the cluster side will be applied in the recorder while recording the session. That means that sensitive information will never reach the cluster. But in case the rules were wrong and you have some sensitive information, you also have the option to basically fix your rules, and when people will play back the sessions, this information will be masked. That's one of the improvements we have done in later version. And now we also have this new way to configure the masking rules that Rick already explained, but I just want to make, it's like we are providing the same options, but now we have predefined set of rules that you can use and make it easier for you to configure the security. So the recommended approach is always to use the class to mark all the sensitive information, or even use the one that Dynatrace provides, which is DTRAM mask. And with that, the information will be automatically masked without having to configure anything. But in case you have to, probably the best approach is to use super safe or whitelist that by default will mask everything. And then you start adding rules to unmask information. That's the safest way to use it. We also have been working a lot to improve the troubleshooting workflow, and that also involves mobile applications. So right now, for example, you have access to this new workflow, which is crash analysis workflow. Here in the application overview for mobile, you are able to check how many crashes you have, which is the percentage of users that are affected by your crashes. And if you want to take a deeper look here, you can go and analyze the crashes. So here what you will find is the clusters that group together all the information, all the crashes that have the same problem. And here you have all the information about affected versions, breakdown per application versions, devices, operating systems. And you even can navigate through the instances of these crashes. So here with the stack trace, you have a lot of information. You can know exactly in which method the application was failing, but you still don't have answer, for example, to why is this crashing for a percentage of the user, which is not the 100%. If something related with the user input, with the velocity of the user doing something, could I have more information about that? You can even navigate through all the crash instances and check this, but you can go to an individual session, for example, and check all the details with the user. So here, you will be able to see all the steps the user did before the crash, but still, you don't have enough information to reproduce the issue. So let's see. Now we have add also session replay for mobile, and you will be able to exactly see what the user did, how the user interacted with your application, how was rotating the device. Here you can see how the masking is done for the mobile applications. And now we have the user interaction here. At this point, for me, it's kind of clear what happened, but it's also normal because I was the one generating the crash. But probably for a developer, for all the developers, will be super clear how to reproduce this crash. So which is the first step to start creating tests and fixing the bugs. So now the only thing they have to do is do all these steps and use this exact input that the user did to reproduce the crash. That's also helpful for people that are not technical one and need to prioritize or understand the impact of the errors. So again, we are providing the same tool that we have right now for web, and now we are providing it for mobile. So I'll stop sharing, and I'll go back to the presentation, because I wanted to make sure that what we are doing with session replay for mobile, we are not recording all the sessions. We are just recording the sessions that terminates in a crash, and we will give the full experience. And we are also not recording the full session. We are saying, okay, let's record just enough information to give context, to have a set of steps that you are able to reproduce the issues, but do not record the full session. So this is the approach we have today. And with this, I think I have all covered, at least the things that I wanted to cover. And now we are ready to answer the questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much. There's a lot of questions that came in, and some are, when are these features going to be available that you just showed? That's kind of one area. But I think you mentioned like the mobile crash when the preview is starting and all that stuff. The other questions were again around security. So one question was around how do we encrypt the data if it makes it into the database? Are we also storing it encrypted and to make sure that nobody can kind of hack into the database and get this data?
Yeah, the point here is that the masking occurs in the browser side. So we never send sensitive information or unmasked information to our cluster. We just receive these stars. In case that the configuration rules were wrong, see, this sensitive information will be stored in our database, but then we will encrypt it before making it available in the UI. Mm-hmm.
All right, and I think there's some papers out there also to which standards we adhere. So there's specific questions, and I'm obviously not the expert, but PII in the database. So some questions that we don't go into detail now, we will forward them, Dania, to you so that you can answer them later on. We have about 2 more minutes because I know we both have to jump to another call. There's a question around overhead. Is there any overhead either in the browser or also on the app that is monitored when enabling session replay?
So in the browser, we are always doing all the complex operations in a service worker. So we are not blocking the UI thread. We are doing operations, but everything in, let's say, a background thread. And exactly the same happens in mobile. So, and we are also taking partial screenshots and everything to make all the information that will travel from the mobile to the server as small as possible. I also have the numbers. If you are interested, just send me the email and I can share it with you.
Yeah, I'll forward you all the questions later on. We have the names of people, so we will be able to answer them directly. Another question came in very early. Is it possible to enable session replay, for instance, only when Dynatrace detects a problem? So basically turn it on during a problematic area, or like when there's problems on the app, to capture more details, and then turn it off again in case the problem is solved?
That's not possible today. We are working also to think how to solve this problem, because that's a question that we are receiving a lot from our clients. So not today, but probably you will be able to do it in the future.
Perfect. So we covered a couple of those that are around performance, overhead, and impact. Another one, I think Rick answered it earlier, but it was around how do we differentiate between somebody sitting idle versus the application is waiting for a response. And I think the idle, the way I got it, right, if we see there's no activity going on with the app because we're monitoring it, if the browser is not waiting for a response, but we also don't see any mouse movements or keyboard interactions, we know the user is idle, right?
Yeah.
Do I get this correct?
Yeah.
All right. There's other questions around the slides. Yes, we will make them available in Dynatrace University. So later on with the recording will be available on YouTube and also on Dynatrace University. Slides will also be there. Last question that I want to highlight here. Do you have also session recording on RAM, on synthetic?
Not,
so if you do
today.
synthetic,
with synthetic monitoring, we are still taking screenshots. So that will also give you an idea what's happening, but we don't have session replay integrated with synthetic yet.
But obviously it's extremely well integrated with RAM, with our real user monitoring. So that's there. Cool. So Dania, considering the time, there's a lot of more questions that I have here on the list, so I will send them over to you and Rick. I know Rick also had to jump because he has a very important personal matter to take care of. Thank you so much. It's a hot topic, and I'm pretty sure we'll do another session soon, and then also reserving a little more time for Q&A, because I'm always happy to answer questions live, because that's the best way of for end use, for these people that are attending, to get the questions answered directly by you. But for now, I say adios, ciao, to Spain.
Bye.
Bye, and see you next time, okay? And thanks for everybody that was listening in.
Thank you for joining. Bye.
Bye-bye.